So there's a conservative economist by the name of Art Laffer. He went on Fox Business to talk about the idea of more COVID stimulus money for regular people. And in typical Art Laffer fashion, he managed to be wrong about absolutely everything.
Congress divided yet again over whether to go big in yet another round of stimulus/relief as Nancy Pelosi wants or pause, as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is insisting. Now, all around the world, the level of stimulus is varied, but the United States is at the top of the list. So does this mean our recovery will be the fastest? Joining me now, Reagan economist Art Laffer. Art, some work out over the weekend by Deutsche Bank suggesting that because we've been the most aggressive between federal and money center printing, that our recovery will be the fastest. So is that an argument for adding even more stimulus into the mix?
If it were true, it would be, Charles, but it's not true. I mean, what you found is in 2008, 2009, the countries that had the least stimulus had the biggest, quickest recovery back to normal. Just so for the record, government spending, Charles, is taxation. Government doesn't create resources. It redistributes resources. Every dollar it gives to someone, it takes from someone else. So that's taxation. And especially when you pay people not to be employed. $600 per week per unemployed worker is a killer for employment and recovery. So just for the facts, I think Deutsche Bank's just way out to lunch on that.
Well, what about liberal economists who, or some are saying, and they were pressing in over the weekend, that this whole conservative argument about debt is ridiculous, and these are their words, because it's money we owe ourselves. Why are we sweating it to this degree? Why would we stop people from having a better life if it's just cash that we owe to ourselves?
Yeah, I love that argument. It's so silly. If you owe me $100, hey, it's just you and me owing ourselves, so let me not pay you back. How's that one, Charles? Does that fit well with you? No, of course not. We don't owe it to ourselves. We owe it to specific people, and we borrowed it from others. It's just silly. I mean, you shouldn't say liberal economists. You just say not very well educated economists.
Art Laffer has been proven wrong about absolutely everything. He came up with the Laffer curve. That's been proven wrong. He's one of the, godfathers of trickle-down economics. Yes, if that sounds familiar to you, it's the ideology under the Reagan administration and the Bush administration, and now the Trump administration, and it's an abject failure. The whole idea of it is a rising tide lifts all boats, and let's cut taxes for the rich and then deregulate, and then what'll happen is the wealth will trickle down from the top down to regular people. But that doesn't happen. When you do tax cuts for the rich, you know what happens? They take that money, they don't create more jobs, they don't open more businesses, they don't hire more people, they stash it. They have tax havens that they use, for example. They're already wealthy. Any more money you give them, they're going to go, oh, sweet, I don't need to spend this or do anything with it. I could just freaking stash it in the Cayman Islands. And that's what they do. And so the idea that, again, it's so ironic. This guy who's really impacted Washington policy for decades, and he's been proven incorrect about everything he said. Guys, Art Laffer is one of the guys, along with Larry Kudlow and many others, who said, no. You don't get it. With the 2017 Republican tax law that they passed, where 83% of the benefits of that went to the top 1%, don't worry, because yes, we're cutting taxes for the rich. Yes, we're deregulating, but it's going to balance the budget. It's not going to add to the deficit. It's not going to do that. Why? And here's the reasoning. Pay attention to this very carefully. They say, well, when we cut taxes for the rich, the economy booms so much that even though the wealthy are paying a lower tax rate, they end up paying more as a raw dollar amount because they make that much more money in profit. So there's so much more growth in the economy that even though the rich are paying a lower tax rate, it's a higher amount in terms of raw dollars. Now, as you know, because you watch this show, you presumably read other news, that didn't happen. There was a massive increase in the deficit under the Trump administration. So when they say, like, no, our philosophy of trickle-down economics cuts taxes for the rich and balances the budget, that doesn't happen. It always, 100% of the time, when you cut taxes for the rich, it adds to the deficit. And they never, ever have an answer for that, ever. They just act like they didn't predict that it would, balance the budget or reduce the deficit. They act like they didn't predict it, but they did. That is something that they said. It's unbelievable, man. Oh my God, he's so full of it. So let's go through some of what he said here. He says, well, the U.S. is already at the top of the stimulus list. No, it's not. We gave a one-time payment of $1,200 to people. You have European countries paying 75 or 80% of workers' wages in perpetuity through the rest of the crisis. What do you mean we're at the top of the stimulus list? Are you insane? But no, see, he counts as part of the stimulus stuff that's not part of the stimulus for regular people. So he counts probably, the Fed pumping liquidity into the marketplace and the $5 trillion in the congressional bailout that's going to corporations at the behest of Steve Mnuchin, the Goldman Sachs guy. He looks at all of that like, oh, that's all stimulus. That all counts as stimulus. No, that's corporate socialism, money handed over to the wealthy and to corporations. That's what that is. That's not stimulus for your average person. But see, it's everything he says is totally misleading or an outright lie. U.S. is at the top of the stimulus list. No, because what counts as stimulus? And in my mind, when I hear stimulus, I think direct, some direct attempt to help regular people weather the storm. That's what I think when I hear stimulus. And we are probably at the bottom of the list when it comes to that kind of stimulus. So he's lying. And then he said, well, go back and look. In 2008 and 2009, the countries with the least stimulus fared the best. Here's why that's totally misleading. The countries that fared the best were in Scandinavia, and I believe Canada actually fared a lot better than the U.S. did. Why did they fare the best? They fared the best because they had marketplace regulation, which didn't allow the crooks and the criminals in the banking industry and on Wall Street. Obviously, they don't have Wall Street in those countries, but they didn't allow the financial industry to be the wild, wild west and run amok and do scams and frauds and get rich as they screw regular people. They didn't allow that. They didn't have totally unregulated subprime mortgage packages, which were rated AAA falsely. And so investors got obliterated on that, and the housing market collapsed. So in other words, they had intelligent regulation in place, and so they didn't experience that giant crash as much. So the countries that fared the best didn't need the stimulus because they had the regulation. But what does he say? He says, totally omits the part about the regulation saving those economies, and he says, well, the countries with the least stimulus fared the best. The only reason they had the least stimulus is because they didn't have the downturn because they had regulation, which again, ironically, the regulation is something Art Laffer is against. See what he does here? These are all so slippery and misleading on purpose. Or he's just a total idiot. But I think this is more misleading. And then he talks about the government spending. He goes, well, government spending is taxation, so that's going to be a siphon on the economy. Well, the Fed spending is not taxation. See, he's totally unfamiliar with modern monetary theory. He seems totally unfamiliar even with Keynesian economics. He talks about the government spending, that's all taxation by definition. No, it's not. If they spend more and they don't raise taxes, that money is not coming from taxes. That money is, in the case of the Fed, you move a couple decimal points on the computer, and that's the end of it. Now, you could agree or disagree with that, but without a doubt, it's not coming in the form of taxes. So when he says, well, the government spending is taxes, that's not true. And then finally he says, well, the problem is we're paying people not to be employed. We have a pandemic, Art. Nobody is taking off. Nobody is unemployed right now because they're lazy. People are unemployed because the economy is collapsing and we have a pandemic. This guy, everything he said there is not true. Everything he said. Even the idea, when there's, a downturn, not doing stimulus is the way to go. Are you kidding me? Then we never would have gotten out of the Great Depression. You know what got us out of the Great Depression? Two things: the New Deal and World War II. Massive, massive, massive government spending projects. And in fact, his ideology really just serves as a vehicle for the wealthy to take all the money and screw regular people and run out the back door with all the money. Cutting taxes for the rich, it really, like the whole ideology of trickle-down economics could be nothing but an elaborate ruse to just give more money to the wealthy and screw over working people. Like, I want my buddies in suits and ties to make all the money, pay no taxes, and then screw the rest of what happens. I'll just come up with an ideological framework to BS everybody, to make them think like there's a high-minded intellectual reason to let the rich take all the money. And it's just so sad that people get duped and dragged into these right-wing movements when this is the dumbest stuff I've ever heard in my life. Like, the stuff he believes isn't even plausible at face value. It's so easy to pick apart. And again, he's had so much influence in Washington, D.C. policy. It's really, really pathetic. It's really disturbing. And unfortunately, I don't see them getting off of this kind of ideology anytime soon. I really don't. Because this guy had just as much of an influence on the fake populist Donald Trump as he did on, the right-wing, Kool-Aid drinking George W. Bush administration. And before that, the George W. Bush administration, the George H.W. Bush administration, and the Democrats are bad too when it comes to economics, but, I mean, these right-wing administrations, nothing they believe is correct about economics. Everything he said here is false, and it's really, really disturbing.